The Matter of Mind by Jim Rohn. The matter of mind is one of the most fascinating and complex areas of study in philosophy, psychology, neuroscience, and cognitive science. It refers to the nature of consciousness, perception, thought, emotion, and other mental processes that shape our subjective experience of the world. Understanding the matter of mind has been a central goal of philosophers and scientists for centuries, and it continues to be a topic of intense debate and inquiry today. In this video, we will explore the various theories and perspectives on the matter of mind, including dualism, materialism, functionalism, and the hard problem of consciousness. Introduction. Dualism is the philosophical belief that reality consists of two distinct and separate substances, mind and matter. According to dualists, mind and matter are fundamentally different and cannot be reduced to each other. This philosophical idea has been debated for centuries, with proponents and critics offering different arguments for and against it. We will explore the concept of dualism, its history, different types of dualism, and the challenges it faces. History of dualism. The history of dualism can be traced back to ancient Greece, where philosophers like Plato and Aristotle explored the nature of reality. Plato believed that the soul and body were two separate entities, and the soul was immortal, while the body was mortal. Aristotle, on the other hand, rejected the idea of dualism and believed that the soul and body were not separate entities but were instead closely intertwined. The concept of dualism gained prominence in the modern era with the work of René Descartes, a French philosopher who is often regarded as the father of modern philosophy. Descartes believed that the mind and body were two separate entities, and he famously proclaimed, "I think, therefore I am." This idea became the foundation of Cartesian dualism, which posits that the mind and body are fundamentally different and can exist independently of each other. Types of dualism. There are different types of dualism, including substance dualism, property dualism, and epistemological dualism. Substance dualism is the most well-known form of dualism and posits that the mind and body are made up of two distinct substances. According to substance dualists, the mind is a non-physical substance that is separate from the physical body. Property dualism, on the other hand, argues that while the mind and body are not separate substances, they have different properties. For instance, the mind may have mental properties such as consciousness, while the body may have physical properties such as mass and density. Epistemological dualism is a form of dualism that focuses on knowledge and argues that there are two different ways of knowing: empirical knowledge and non-empirical knowledge. Empirical knowledge is based on observation and experience, while non-empirical knowledge is based on intuition and reason. Challenges to dualism. Dualism faces several challenges, including the mind-body problem and the interaction problem. The mind-body problem asks how the mind and body are related and how they interact with each other. If the mind and body are two distinct substances, how can they interact with each other? How does the mind cause physical changes in the body, and vice versa? The interaction problem is a specific challenge to substance dualism, which posits that the mind and body are two separate substances. If the mind and body are separate substances, how can they interact with each other? How can a non-physical substance interact with a physical substance? Critics argue that substance dualism cannot provide a satisfactory explanation for the interaction problem. Another challenge to dualism is the problem of other minds. This problem asks how we can know that other people have minds. If the mind is a non-physical substance, how can we observe it in others? How do we know that others have consciousness and experience the world in the same way that we do? Critics of dualism also argue that it is incompatible with modern science, which describes the world in terms of physical laws and properties. Dualism posits the existence of non-physical entities, which are outside the realm of scientific investigation. Critics argue that dualism is untestable and therefore cannot be a legitimate scientific theory. Conclusion. Dualism is a complex philosophical concept that has been debated for centuries. While proponents of dualism argue that it offers a satisfactory explanation for the nature of reality, critics argue that it faces. Introduction. Materialism is a philosophical concept that asserts that everything in the universe, including the human mind, is composed of matter and can be explained by physical laws. Materialism stands in contrast to dualism, which posits the existence of non-physical substances such as the mind. We will explore the concept of materialism, its history, different types of materialism, and its implications. History of materialism. The history of materialism can be traced back to ancient Greece, where philosophers such as Democritus and Epicurus proposed that the universe was made up of atoms and void. They argued that everything, including the human mind, could be explained by the physical properties of atoms and their movements. This view of the universe as a material object was later developed by Lucretius, a Roman philosopher, who argued that the universe was infinite and eternal and that everything in it was made up of atoms. Materialism gained prominence in the modern era with the work of scientists such as Isaac Newton and Pierre Laplace, who demonstrated that the universe could be explained by physical laws. In the 19th century, materialism became a prominent philosophical idea, with the rise of scientific materialism and Marxist materialism. Types of materialism. There are different types of materialism, including physicalism, eliminative materialism, and reductive materialism. Physicalism is the most common form of materialism and asserts that everything in the universe, including mental states and processes, can be explained by physical laws. Physicalism posits that the mind is not a separate substance but is instead a product of physical processes in the brain. Eliminative materialism is a more radical form of materialism that asserts that mental states and processes do not exist at all. Eliminative materialists argue that concepts such as consciousness, beliefs, and desires are merely illusions and do not refer to anything real. Reductive materialism, on the other hand, asserts that mental states and processes can be reduced to physical states and processes. According to reductive materialists, mental states and processes are identical to physical states and processes, but they are described in different ways. Implications of materialism. Materialism has several implications for our understanding of the universe and ourselves. One of the key implications of materialism is that there is no separate realm of the mind or soul. According to materialism, mental states and processes are not separate from physical processes in the brain but are instead a product of those processes. Materialism also implies that everything in the universe, including human beings, is subject to physical laws. This means that human behavior can be explained by physical processes in the brain and the environment. Materialism also implies that there is no such thing as free will, as human behavior is determined by physical processes in the brain and the environment. Materialism also has implications for our understanding of morality and ethics. According to materialism, there is no such thing as an objective moral law, as everything in the universe is subject to physical laws. Moral values and principles are therefore a product of human society and culture. Challenges to materialism. Materialism faces several challenges, including the problem of consciousness and the problem of qualia. The problem of consciousness asks how physical processes in the brain can give rise to subjective experiences such as pain, pleasure, and consciousness. Critics of materialism argue that it cannot provide a satisfactory explanation for the subjective nature of consciousness. The problem of qualia is another challenge to materialism. Qualia are subjective experiences that cannot be explained by physical processes in the brain. For example, the experience of seeing the color red cannot be reduced to physical processes in the brain. Critics of materialism argue that it cannot provide a satisfactory explanation for the subjective nature of qualia. Introduction. Functionalism is a philosophical theory that attempts to explain mental states and processes in terms of their function or purpose. According to functionalism, mental states and processes are not defined by their physical properties but by their causal role in a system. We will explore the concept of functionalism, its history, different types of functionalism, and its implications. History of functionalism. Functionalism has its roots in the early 20th century, with the work of American philosophers such as William James and John Dewey. They argued that the mind was not a passive receptacle of sensory input but an active agent that interacted with the environment. James and Dewey emphasized the importance of mental processes such as perception, attention, and memory in adapting to the environment. In the 1950s and 1960s, functionalism became a dominant philosophical theory, particularly in the field of cognitive psychology. The cognitive revolution in psychology emphasized the importance of mental processes such as attention, memory, and decision-making in human behavior. Functionalism provided a framework for understanding these mental processes in terms of their function or purpose. Types of functionalism. There are different types of functionalism, including machine functionalism, psychofunctionalism, and causal functionalism. Machine functionalism, also known as computational functionalism, asserts that mental states and processes can be understood as computations that operate on input to produce output. According to machine functionalism, mental processes can be modeled as computer programs that process information. Psychofunctionalism, on the other hand, emphasizes the relationship between mental states and behavior. According to psychofunctionalism, mental states are defined by their causal role in producing behavior. For example, the mental state of hunger can be defined in terms of its role in producing behavior such as eating. Causal functionalism is a more general form of functionalism that emphasizes the causal relationships between mental states and processes. According to causal functionalism, mental states and processes are defined by their causal role in a system. Causal functionalism is not committed to any specific theory of the mind but emphasizes the importance of the causal relationships between mental states and processes. Implications of functionalism. Functionalism has several implications for our understanding of the mind and behavior. One of the key implications of functionalism is that mental states and processes can be understood in terms of their function or purpose. According to functionalism, mental states and processes are not defined by their physical properties but by their causal role in a system. Functionalism also implies that mental states and processes are not identical to physical states and processes. According to functionalism, mental states and processes can be realized by different physical states and processes. For example, the mental state of pain can be realized by different physical states and processes in different organisms. Functionalism also has implications for our understanding of the relationship between the mind and the brain. According to functionalism, mental states and processes are not identical to physical states and processes in the brain but are instead defined by their function or purpose. This means that mental states and processes can be realized by different physical states and processes in different organisms. Challenges to functionalism. Functionalism faces several challenges, including the problem of multiple realizability and the problem of qualia. The problem of multiple realizability asks how mental states and processes can be realized by different physical states and processes. Critics of functionalism argue that it cannot provide a satisfactory explanation for the diversity of mental states and processes in different organisms. The problem of qualia is another challenge to functionalism. Qualia are subjective experiences that cannot be explained by functional relationships between mental states and processes. For example, the experience of seeing the color red cannot be explained solely in terms of its functional role in producing behavior. Critics of functionalism argue that it cannot provide a satisfactory explanation. The hard problem of consciousness is a philosophical puzzle that arises from the fact that conscious experience appears to be qualitatively different from physical processes in the brain. It is a problem that has puzzled philosophers, cognitive scientists, and neuroscientists for decades. The problem arises from the observation that there is something that it is like to be conscious. This subjective experience, or qualia, cannot be fully explained by any physical process or scientific theory. While science can describe the neural processes that occur in the brain when we experience something, it cannot explain why these processes give rise to subjective experience. The hard problem of consciousness was first introduced by philosopher David Chalmers in his 1995 paper Facing Up to the Problem of Consciousness. In this paper, Chalmers argued that consciousness cannot be reduced to purely physical processes in the brain, and that there is a fundamental mystery about how subjective experience arises from neural activity. The problem can be illustrated with an example. Consider the experience of seeing the color red. From a physical perspective, this experience can be described as the firing of certain neurons in the brain in response to light of a certain wavelength. However, this description does not fully capture the subjective experience of seeing the color red. The question is, why does the firing of certain neurons give rise to the subjective experience of seeing red? The hard problem of consciousness is different from the easy problem of consciousness, which involves explaining the various functions of consciousness, such as perception, attention, and memory. The hard problem is concerned with the subjective experience of consciousness, which cannot be reduced to these functions. Attempts to solve the hard problem of consciousness. There have been several attempts to solve the hard problem of consciousness. One approach is to deny the existence of subjective experience altogether. This approach, known as eliminativism, argues that subjective experience is an illusion and that consciousness can be fully explained in terms of physical processes in the brain. However, this approach is widely rejected by philosophers and cognitive scientists, as it seems to go against our basic intuitions about the nature of consciousness. Another approach is to explain consciousness in terms of information processing. This approach, known as cognitive functionalism, argues that consciousness is a product of the brain's ability to process information. According to this view, conscious experience is a product of the brain's ability to integrate and process information from different sensory modalities. A related approach is the global workspace theory, which suggests that consciousness arises from the brain's ability to integrate information and make it available to different parts of the brain. According to this theory, consciousness is like a global workspace, where different parts of the brain can access and share information. Another approach is to explain consciousness in terms of the properties of complex systems. This approach, known as emergentism, argues that consciousness arises from the complex interactions between the neurons in the brain. According to this view, consciousness is an emergent property that arises from the interactions between simpler components. Despite these various attempts, the hard problem of consciousness remains unsolved. While these approaches provide interesting insights into the nature of consciousness, they do not fully explain how subjective experience arises from physical processes in the brain. Implications of the hard problem of consciousness. The hard problem of consciousness has several important implications for our understanding of the mind and the world around us. One implication is that it challenges the traditional view of the world as a purely physical, materialistic place. If consciousness cannot be fully explained by physical processes, then there must be more to the world than just physical matter. The hard problem of consciousness also raises questions about the nature of free will. If consciousness is not fully reducible to physical processes, then it may be that free will exists as a non-physical phenomenon. This challenges the traditional view that free will is an illusion and that